In the heart of a sprawling metropolis, amid towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, lived Evelyn Hawthorne, a wealthy entrepreneur renowned for her successful luxury fashion brand. Standing at 6 feet tall, her presence commanded attention. Evelyn had wavy chestnut hair that cascaded down her back, framing a face adorned with striking green eyes, sharp cheekbones, and a confident smile that concealed her inner turmoil. Despite her outward success, loneliness loomed over her like a dark cloud. Evelyn's life took a drastic turn when she hired Alex, a young man in his late 20s with tousled black hair and deep-set brown eyes. He was strikingly handsome, possessing an effortless charm that drew people in. Alex had a background filled with struggles. He was a former athlete whose career was cut short by injury, leaving him searching for purpose. Now, he worked as a personal assistant, earning a meager salary while living in the shadows of the affluent world. Their initial meetings were steeped in tension. Evelyn, accustomed to authority, often found herself frustrated by the subtle nuances of their budding relationship. Alex, on the other hand, felt the weight of his attraction to her. Each time they crossed paths, a magnetic pull charged the air between them, leaving both in a state of confusion. One fateful evening, as they were finalizing preparations for a major fashion show, Evelyn glanced up from her sketches and caught Alex's gaze lingering on her. His eyes, full of admiration, made her heart race in a way she hadn't felt in years. The moment lingered, stretching into silence, heavy with unspoken words. "What am I feeling?" Evelyn thought, her mind racing. "This is inappropriate. He's my employee." Yet, the warmth radiating from their shared connection was undeniable. "Evelyn," Alex finally broke the silence, his voice low and sincere. "I think this collection is going to be the best yet. You have such a unique vision." His compliment washed over her, igniting something deep within. "Thank you, Alex. Your support means a lot to me," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As the days passed, their bond deepened, entwining through shared laughter and late-night brainstorming sessions. They confided in each other, Evelyn about her fears of failure and Alex about his longing to reclaim a sense of purpose. Each shared moment was charged with an electricity they could no longer ignore. On the night of the fashion show, the atmosphere was charged with excitement. Backstage, Evelyn was a whirlwind of nerves. The models were prepped, and the music thumped through the walls. As she paced, she felt Alex's presence behind her, steady and reassuring. "Breathe, Evelyn," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. The warmth of his touch sent shivers down her spine, igniting an undeniable chemistry between them. She turned to face him, their faces inches apart, the world around them fading into oblivion. In that moment, something shifted. The boundaries of employer and employee dissolved, replaced by an intense desire. She could see it reflected in Alex's eyes, an unspoken longing that mirrored her own. The air was thick with tension as they hesitated, each moment stretching into eternity. "Alex," she began, her voice trembling, but the words faded as he stepped closer, his heart racing in sync with hers. The distance between them evaporated as he cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing against her cheek. Before they could question their actions, their lips met in a kiss that ignited a fire within both of them. It was a kiss filled with longing, hope, and the promise of something forbidden. Evelyn felt the walls she had built around her heart crumble, leaving her vulnerable yet exhilarated. Suddenly, the reality of their situation crashed down upon her. "What have I done?" she thought, pulling away abruptly. "We shouldn't have." "I know," Alex replied breathless, his brow furrowed with concern. "But I can't deny how I feel about you." Evelyn's mind raced with the implications. How could she let this happen? Yet a part of her relished the thrill of the forbidden. She knew this connection was dangerous, but the yearning she felt for him was intoxicating. As they stood there, the weight of their choices hung heavy in the air. Little did they know, this moment would alter the course of their lives forever, leading them down a path filled with passion, betrayal, and unforeseen consequences. Days turned into weeks, and the fashion show became a resounding success. However, for Evelyn and Alex, The aftermath was a tangled web of emotions and hidden secrets. Their clandestine romance blossomed in stolen moments, a quiet lunch in a secluded cafe, whispers exchanged in the shadows of her office, and fiery embraces in the depths of night. Evelyn felt alive in a way she hadn't experienced in years, but guilt gnawed at her. What if someone finds out? The implications of their affair loomed over her like a dark cloud, but the thrill of being with Alex overshadowed her fears. One evening, as she prepared for bed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The flush in her cheeks, the sparkle in her eyes, was this love? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, persistent knock on her door. It was her husband, Richard Hawthorne, a distinguished businessman known for his success and ruthless demeanor. He had been away on a business trip, and she hadn't seen him in days. "Evelyn, open the door," he called out, his voice laced with authority. With a heavy heart, she opened the door to find Richard standing there, his dark suit crisp and immaculate. His brown hair was slicked back, but the furrow in his brow revealed his irritation. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me." "I was just busy with work, Richard," Evelyn replied, forcing a smile. Richard stepped inside, scanning the room with a critical eye. "Busy? Or distracted?" His gaze fell upon her, piercing and analytical. Evelyn felt her heart race, her mind racing to mask her guilt. "I'm fine, just focused on the upcoming launch." "Your focus should be on our marriage," he said, crossing his arms. "We need to talk about us." As they sat down, Evelyn's pulse quickened. She knew their marriage had been rocky for some time, but she hadn't anticipated a confrontation so soon. Richard's presence was commanding, and for a moment, she felt trapped under his gaze. "Evelyn, I can sense that something has changed," he continued, his voice steady yet tense. "You're distant. You used to be so passionate about your work, but now it feels like you're pushing me away." He suspects something, she thought, panic rising in her chest. "Richard, I'm just busy," she replied, trying to keep her tone calm. "But it's more than that, isn't it?" His tone shifted, probing deeper. "I care about you, but we're growing apart. You need to be honest with me." Evelyn's heart raced. Should I tell him the truth? The thought of Alex loomed large in her mind, a stark reminder of the passion they shared. But the fear of losing everything she had built made her hesitate. "I don't want to fight," she finally said, attempting to deflect. "Let's just focus on the launch. We can deal with our issues later." Richard's expression hardened, but he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But know that I won't stand idly by while our marriage crumbles." As he stormed out, Evelyn felt a wave of relief mixed with guilt. "I can't keep this a secret forever." She knew that with every secret kiss shared with Alex, she was walking a tightrope over a chasm of betrayal. The next day, Evelyn found herself distracted at work. Her thoughts were consumed by the moments shared with Alex, his laughter, the way he looked at her, the way they fit together so perfectly. But how long can this last? She decided to confront her feelings. That evening, she invited Alex to her apartment under the pretext of discussing work. The atmosphere was charged with unspoken desire, their connection palpable as they exchanged knowing glances. "Evelyn, Alex began, but she silenced him with a finger to his lips, drawing him closer. "No more hiding," she whispered, her voice a mix of determination and vulnerability. They kissed, and the world outside faded away. But amidst their passionate embrace, Evelyn felt a nagging doubt. The thrill of their affair clashed with her loyalty to Richard, and she was left questioning everything. Days passed, and their relationship flourished in secrecy, each rendezvous deepening their bond. However, Evelyn could feel the cracks forming in her carefully crafted facade. Richard's suspicions grew, and he began questioning her more frequently, seeking to peel back the layers of her guarded heart. Then one fateful evening, everything changed. After another passionate encounter with Alex, Evelyn realized she felt different. An unsettling wave of nausea washed over her. As the days turned into weeks, the symptoms became undeniable. Could it be? The thought sent her heart racing with a mix of fear and excitement. "I'm pregnant." Panic flooded her mind. The reality of her situation crashed down around her, and the weight of her choices threatened to crush her spirit. She couldn't fathom how. Evelyn stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her heart pounding as she held the small white stick in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines stared back at her, vivid and undeniable. "I'm pregnant." The revelation sent shockwaves through her, making her stomach churn. She felt the walls of her carefully constructed life beginning to crumble around her, the foundation of her existence shaking beneath her feet. "What will I do?" she thought, panic spiraling in her chest. The joyous thrill of her love for Alex mingled with the looming specter of consequences. She envisioned Richard's reaction, the shock, the anger, the betrayal. The thought of his face twisted in disbelief made her stomach churn even more. She needed to think. Evelyn closed her eyes and took a deep breath, grounding herself as her thoughts raced. She could already imagine the questions. Who is the father? The accusation felt like a knife to her heart, and she feared the truth would slice through the fragile fabric of her life. Her mind drifted to Alex. How will he react? The uncertainty gnawed at her. Would he welcome the news or panic and flee? She felt an overwhelming urge to confide in him, but the potential fallout kept her frozen in place. As the days passed, Evelyn found herself trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. Each time Richard approached her, she felt the weight of her secret heavy on her shoulders. He was observant, increasingly suspicious, and she could see the worry etched across his face. One evening, Richard entered their home with an unusual silence. The air felt thick with tension as he removed his shoes at the entrance. Evelyn's heart raced. She knew he wanted to talk. "Evelyn, we need to discuss our future," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Can't it wait, Richard?" "I'm tired," she replied, trying to deflect. He narrowed his eyes, disappointment flickering across his face. "No, it can't. I'm concerned about you. You've been distant, and I can't help but feel you're hiding something." Her breath caught in her throat. "He knows. I'm just focused on the launch," she replied, her voice shaky, hoping to maintain the facade. Richard sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Evelyn, I love you. But if there's something going on, you need to tell me. I can't stand the thought of losing you." "Losing me?" The irony pierced her heart like a dagger. She wanted to scream, to confess everything, but the words clung to her throat like poison. "I'm fine, Richard. Just stressed," she finally said, forcing a smile that felt more like a mask. He studied her intently, and for a moment she thought he might see through her facade. But he simply nodded, his eyes clouded with concern. "I just want us to be okay. We've been through a lot, and I don't want this to tear us apart." As he spoke, Evelyn felt a pang of guilt twisting in her stomach. This isn't just about us anymore. That night, Evelyn lay awake, her mind racing. She needed to talk to Alex, to share the burden that weighed so heavily on her heart. With trembling hands, she sent him a text, asking him to come over. The seconds felt like hours as she waited, her anxiety building with each passing moment. When Alex finally arrived, he looked concerned, his brow furrowed. "Evelyn, what's wrong? You sounded urgent in your message." She invited him in, her heart racing as she closed the door behind him. The room felt charged with unspoken tension, the air thick with anticipation. "I have something important to tell you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" He stepped closer, concern etched across his features. Evelyn took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she possessed. "I'm pregnant, Alex." His expression shifted from concern to shock, and for a moment, he seemed frozen in place. "Pregnant? Are you sure?" "I took a test. It's positive," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. The reality of the situation hung heavy in the air, and Evelyn could see the gears turning in Alex's mind. "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice filled with urgency. "I don't know," she confessed, her heart racing. "Richard suspects something. If he finds out, it could ruin everything." Alex ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. "But this isn't just a secret, It's a life. What do you want, Evelyn? What do I want? The question echoed in her mind, tearing at her heart. She loved Alex, but the implications of their affair were overwhelming. I don't know, she whispered, feeling the weight of uncertainty press down on her. I've never been in this situation before. Alex stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. His warmth enveloped her, and she leaned into him, seeking comfort amidst the chaos. We'll figure it out together, he assured her, his voice steady. Evelyn closed her eyes, finding solace in his embrace, but the reality of their situation loomed large. Together? But at what cost? As they stood there, enveloped in each other's warmth, Evelyn's heart ached with conflicting emotions. The love they shared was undeniable, but the risks were monumental. In the days that followed, Evelyn struggled with the weight of her secret. She attended doctor's appointments, her heart racing with each passing moment. The prospect of motherhood filled her with both dread and anticipation. What kind of mother can I be? She thought, her mind racing. The responsibility of bringing a child into the world weighed heavily on her, and every decision felt monumental. Yet, every time she saw Alex, the warmth of their connection ignited a fire within her. They spent quiet evenings together, planning for a future that felt increasingly uncertain. But their love blossomed, transcending the complications of their lives. As Evelyn's pregnancy progressed, Richard's suspicions continued to grow. He became more watchful, more insistent on spending time with her. Each interaction left her feeling more trapped, the walls closing in as her secret threatened to unravel everything. Then, one evening, as she sat in the living room, Richard entered with a serious expression. Evelyn, we need to talk, he said, his tone grave. She felt her stomach drop, dread pooling in her chest. What about? I've been doing some thinking, he began, pacing the room. You've been acting strange lately. I can't shake the feeling that there's something you're not telling me. Evelyn's heart raced as she struggled to maintain her composure. What if he finds out? I'm just busy with work, Richard, she replied, forcing a smile. He stopped, turning to face her, his eyes piercing. I want to believe you, but this isn't just about work. I care about you, and I can't help but feel like you're hiding something. Tension crackled in the air as she met his gaze, her heart racing. I'm not hiding anything, she insisted, her voice trembling. Richard took a step closer, his expression softening. Evelyn, please. I just want to be there for you. If there's something going on, I need you to trust me. As she looked into his eyes, the weight of her secret pressed down harder than ever. She wanted to tell him everything, to be honest, but the fear of losing him held her back. I promise I'll talk to you about it soon, she finally said, avoiding his gaze. Richard nodded, though doubt flickered in his eyes. I hope so. I just want us to be okay. Evelyn's heart ached as he walked away, leaving her alone with her turmoil. Can we ever truly be okay? That night, as she lay in bed, the weight of her choices pressed down on her. The love she felt for Alex was undeniable, yet the life she had built with Richard felt equally important. The emotional tug-of-war left her feeling lost and uncertain, and she knew that time was running out. The truth loomed over her like a storm cloud, ready to burst, and she could only hope that when it did, she would be strong enough to face whatever consequences awaited her. The clock was ticking, and Evelyn knew that soon, she would have to make a choice that could change everything. As she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with visions of Alex and Richard, each representing different paths in her life. But as the night wore on, the uncertainty of her future haunted her, and she could only hope that she would find clarity before it was too late. The morning sun streamed through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow across the bedroom. Evelyn lay in bed, tangled in the sheets, her mind racing. Today was the day she had decided to confront her reality. As the minutes ticked by, the weight of her decision pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. She sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, her heart pounding. How do I even begin to explain this? The thought sent a chill down her spine. The last few weeks had felt like an emotional roller coaster, and now, standing at the edge of a precipice, she felt a mix of fear and determination. In the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air as Richard moved about, preparing breakfast. He greeted her with a warm smile, and for a moment, Evelyn felt a pang of guilt. How can I do this to him? Good morning, love. You look beautiful, Richard said, his voice smooth and comforting. He leaned over to kiss her cheek, and she felt the warmth of his affection seep into her skin. Good morning, she replied, forcing a smile as she joined him at the kitchen island. The tension hung thick between them, and she felt her stomach twist with apprehension. As they sat down to eat, Richard made small talk about their plans for the day, but Evelyn's mind was elsewhere. I have to tell him today. I can't keep living this lie. With each bite, she felt the knot in her stomach tighten. The coffee cup shook slightly in her hand, and she could feel her pulse racing. Richard noticed her unease, his brows furrowing in concern. Evelyn, are you okay? You seem a bit off. I'm fine, she lied, her voice shaky. She set her cup down, steeling herself. Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about. Richard paused, setting down his fork. The air thickened with anticipation as he looked at her, his expression shifting from casual to serious. What is it? Evelyn took a deep breath, her heart hammering in her chest. It's about our future, and my health. His brow furrowed deeper, and she could see the concern etched on his face. What do you mean? Here it goes, she thought, her stomach flipping. I'm pregnant, Richard. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Time seemed to freeze as she watched Richard's expression shift from confusion to shock. He blinked, as if processing the words she had just spoken. Pregnant? Are you sure? Evelyn nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I took a test. It's positive. The silence that followed felt deafening, and her heart raced as she watched the realization wash over him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Richard, she started, but he interrupted her, rising from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. How long have you known? His voice was sharp, filled with disbelief. A few weeks, she admitted, her voice trembling. And you didn't think to tell me? The hurt in his eyes cut deep, and she felt her heart shatter at the sight. I was going to. I didn't know how. I was scared, Richard, she pleaded, standing to face him. Scared of what? He demanded, his anger simmering just below the surface. That I wouldn't want the child? Or that I'd be upset about this? It's not just about you, she exclaimed, her own frustration bubbling over. This changes everything for both of us. I didn't know how to handle it. Richard turned away, running a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to process the news. And who is the father? His voice was cold, the accusation sharp and painful. Evelyn's heart sank, and she felt the tears slip down her cheeks. It's Alex, she whispered, each word feeling like a dagger to her heart. He turned back to her, eyes wide with disbelief and anger. Alex? The man you hired to help with the estate? Yes, she shouted, her voice cracking. But it wasn't just that. It became something real, something deeper than I ever expected. Richard's face flushed with rage. And you thought you could just keep this from me? How could you betray me like this, Evelyn? I didn't want to hurt you, she cried, desperation seeping into her voice. I never meant for it to happen. I fell in love, Richard. I didn't plan for any of this. Fell in love? He echoed, his voice low and dangerous. Is that how you justify this? You think I'll just accept it? No, she thought, feeling the walls closing in. Please, just listen. I'm still the same person. I still love you. Richard's expression hardened, and she could see the pain etched across his face. You think love can just erase this? You've shattered my trust, Evelyn. I can't even look at you right now. The room felt suffocating, and Evelyn could hardly breathe. "Please, Richard. Let's talk this through. We can find a way to make this work." "Make it work?" He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You think we can go back to how things were? You've destroyed everything. I need time to think." He stormed out of the kitchen, leaving her alone, heart racing and stomach churning. She sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her cheeks as the weight of reality crashed down on her. What had she done? The guilt consumed her, wrapping around her like a vice. What if he never forgives me? Hours passed in a blur of sorrow and anxiety. Evelyn felt like a ghost in her own home, the silence echoing around her as she replayed the conversation in her mind. Richard's anger had been palpable, but it was the hurt in his eyes that haunted her. When she finally gathered the strength to check her phone, there was a message from Alex. "Can we meet? I'm worried about you." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She needed to see him, to share her anguish, but she also felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. What if Richard finds out? But she knew she had to talk to Alex. He was the one person who understood the turmoil she was facing. She quickly responded, arranging to meet at their favorite cafe later that afternoon. As she arrived at the cafe, the familiar sights and smells felt strangely comforting, yet her heart raced with apprehension. She spotted Alex at a corner table, his expression tense as he saw her approach. "Evelyn," he said softly, rising to greet her. His eyes searched hers, looking for answers. "How are you holding up?" "Not well," she admitted, sinking into the chair across from him. "Richard knows everything now." Alex's brow furrowed in concern. "What did he say?" "He was furious, hurt," she whispered, feeling the tears prick her eyes again. "He stormed out. I don't know if he'll ever forgive me." Alex reached across the table, his hand warm and reassuring. "I'm so sorry. I wish it didn't have to be this way." "It's my fault," she said, shaking her head. "I thought I could keep it from him. I thought I could manage it all. But you can't do this alone," Alex said, his voice steady. "You need support, and I want to be there for you." Evelyn felt a surge of warmth at his words, but it was also laced with fear. "What if Richard comes after you? I can't bear to put you in danger." "I won't let him intimidate me," Alex replied firmly. "You're the most important person in my life, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." The sincerity in his voice sent shivers down her spine. "But at what cost? Can we really face this together?" she asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Yes," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You and me. We can find a way to navigate this. I believe in us." Evelyn felt hope flicker in her chest, but it was mingled with fear. "But what about the baby? What if Richard wants nothing to do with it?" Alex took a deep breath, his expression softening. "We'll figure that out too. It won't be easy, but we can't give up. You deserve happiness, and so does that child." Evelyn nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles and challenges, but in that moment, with Alex's hand in hers, she felt a glimmer of hope. As they talked, plans formed in their minds, but the reality of their situation loomed large. The confrontation with Richard had left a chasm between them, one that would take time and effort to bridge. Eventually, Evelyn returned home, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The house felt empty, and she could feel Richard's absence in every corner. She glanced at the clock, each tick echoing in the silence. When Richard returned later that evening, the tension in the air was palpable. He entered without a word, his expression. Richard entered the house like a storm cloud, his face a mask of barely contained fury. The door clicked shut behind him, its sound reverberating through the silent room. Evelyn, who had been sitting on the couch in the dimly lit living room, rose to her feet. Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the inevitable conversation hung between them. She studied him as he stood by the door, his shoulders rigid, hands clenched into fists. He hadn't looked at her yet. For a moment, it felt like they were two strangers sharing the same space, separated by a gulf of betrayal and misunderstanding. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice cold and flat. "Is this what you wanted?" Evelyn flinched at the harshness in his tone. She took a hesitant step toward him. "Richard, please, I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." He turned to face her, his eyes flashing with a mixture of pain and anger. "Hurt me? Evelyn, you've done more than hurt me. You've destroyed everything we had." His words cut like shards of glass, each syllable dripping with bitterness. Tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't try to hide them this time. "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I've broken your trust, and I'm so sorry. But it wasn't something I planned. It wasn't something I ever imagined would happen." Richard crossed the room in a few quick strides, his presence overwhelming, his gaze burning into her. "You fell in love with a man who works for us. You slept with him, and now you're pregnant with his child. How am I supposed to understand that? How am I supposed to even look at you the same way after this?" The raw hurt in his voice was unbearable, and Evelyn felt as though she were suffocating under the weight of her guilt. She reached out a trembling hand, wanting to close the distance between them, to somehow make him see how sorry she was. But he pulled back, avoiding her touch, and the rejection stung more than words ever could. "I don't know how to explain it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I never stopped loving you, Richard. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself and I made a terrible mistake." Richard's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he paced the room, trying to rein in his emotions. "A mistake? Evelyn, this isn't just a mistake. This is our lives. Our marriage. And you've brought someone else into it, someone who doesn't belong here." Evelyn sank back onto the couch, her body trembling. She buried her face in her hands, the weight of everything crashing down on her. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice muffled by her tears. "I don't know how to fix this." Richard stopped pacing and stood in front of her, his expression hardening. "You can't fix this. I can't just forget what you did. I don't know if I can ever forgive you." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she gasped, her chest tightening with the enormity of what he was saying. "Richard, please. You've betrayed me, Evelyn. You've broken everything we built together." He shook his head, his voice softening, but the anger still simmering beneath. "How do we move forward from here?" There was a long pause, the silence between them heavy with uncertainty. Evelyn's tears flowed freely now, but she forced herself to speak, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But this baby, it's innocent in all of this. I can't undo what's been done, but I can make sure that this child is loved. And I need to be honest with myself about my feelings for Alex." Richard's face tightened at the mention of Alex's name. "Honest with yourself?" he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "Are you telling me you still love him?" Evelyn hesitated, searching for the right words, knowing there was no easy answer. I don't know. I'm confused. I've spent so much time trying to be perfect, to fit into the life we built together, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of who I am. Alex, he made me feel like I could be someone else. Someone freer." Richard's eyes darkened, and for the first time, there was a hint of resignation in his voice. "And where does that leave us, Evelyn?" "I don't want to lose you, Richard," she said, her voice shaking. "I love you. But I can't lie to myself anymore. I need to figure out what this means for me. For us." He stood there, silent, watching her with a mixture of sadness and anger. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, measured. "I don't know if I can live with this, Evelyn. I don't know if I can raise another man's child under my roof. Every time I look at you, I'll see him." Evelyn wiped her tears away, the room spinning as she realized how deep the wound had cut. "I understand. And if you can't stay, I won't hold it against you." Richard turned away, his shoulders slumping as the weight of the decision bore down on him. "I need time. I need space to think about what I want, and what I can live with. Evelyn nodded, her throat tightening as she struggled to hold back more tears. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I'll be here. With a final glance, Richard walked out of the room, leaving Evelyn alone once again. The silence that followed was deafening, and she felt the ache of his absence deep in her chest. But for the first time in weeks, there was also a strange sense of clarity. She had told him the truth, and now, the future was uncertain. Days turned into weeks, and during that time, Evelyn focused on her own healing. She spent hours in the garden, the cool earth grounding her as she tended to the flowers. The baby grew inside her, a constant reminder of the life she had to nurture, even as her marriage hung in the balance. Alex continued to support her, visiting when he could, but there was an unspoken understanding between them that things had changed. He was hopeful, but Evelyn could see the tension in his eyes, the uncertainty of what lay ahead for them. As for Richard, he kept his distance. He moved into the guest house on the estate, avoiding contact as he tried to come to terms with everything. But there was something different about him now, something broken. The man who had once been her protector, her partner, was now a stranger grappling with the ultimate betrayal. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the estate, Richard knocked on the door of the main house. Evelyn answered, her heart racing as she saw him standing there. He looked tired, but there was a resolve in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Can we talk? He asked, his voice steady. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They sat in the living room, the air between them thick with unspoken words. After a long pause, Richard finally spoke. I've had time to think about everything. About us. About the baby. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, but she stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. I'm not going to pretend that what you did didn't hurt me. It did. Deeply. He took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. But I've also realized that this child didn't ask for any of this. And neither did you. You made a mistake, but it's one that we have to live with now. If we're going to move forward, we need to do it together. For the sake of the baby, and for ourselves. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of hope. Richard, He held up a hand, stopping her. I'm not saying it will be easy. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully forgive you. But I'm willing to try. For the child's sake, and because I still care about you. Evelyn felt her heart swell with gratitude and relief. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I love you, Richard. I never stopped. Richard nodded, his expression softening. We'll take it one step at a time. But know this, Evelyn, we're in this together now. No more lies. No more secrets. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she knew that their journey would be long and difficult, but it was one they would face together, for better or worse. And with that understanding, they both took the first step toward healing the wounds of their broken past, with the promise of a future built on truth and love.